welcome to the Highlands Current podcast. I'm Chip Rowe, the editor of The Current. In each episode, our reporters will take you behind the scenes as they speak with residents of the Highlands about their interests, passions, and adventures.
Bonny Carmicino, who lives in Cold Spring, has had an interesting career path, but primarily is a clothing pattern maker. I spoke with her near the end of her term as president of the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals about when she learned to sew, her winding route from Capitol Hill to MIT to Wall Street and law school, and what she calls her life work, creating a way to have our clothes fit us better. Here's our conversation.
Did you sew as a child? When did the interest in sewing start?
I learned to sew when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
The story is that my mom was teaching my older sister to sew, and at some point took a break. And, back then there weren't iPads or anything, so I was watching. And when she took a break, I then went in and started sewing. And my mom came in and said she would have told me I wasn't old enough, but didn't have the heart to because I was doing such a good job.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
This is on a machine. You were watching her on a machine.
This is a treadle sewing machine.
Yeah, okay.
Now, remember, I was 4 years old, so I wasn't big enough to sit down. So I had my feet on the treadle, standing up, holding onto the head of the machine with my right hand, guiding the fabric left-handed.
Wow, you were a natural.
Yeah. At 7, I announced I wanted to be a seamstress, and I was told in no uncertain terms that I would end up in a sweatshop and I should stay in school. So I did, which is the reason that I have all the education I do. I avoided becoming a seamstress for all those years. One thing is, I didn't yet have the language to say, I want to be a production pattern maker. I mean, I now know I would have made a kick-ass production pattern maker because production pattern making requires both sewing knowledge and technical skills. So I graduated from high school and...
Where was this that you grew up?
Okay, I grew up in Walla Walla, Washington.
Oh.
The home of the wishy-washy washing machine works of Walla Walla, Washington, made famous by Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Wow.
So my arrogant 18-year-old self had a little disagreement with my parents. They wanted me to go to a local college, and I wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. They said if I didn't go to the local school, they wouldn't pay tuition. So I topped in my high school class, told them I wasn't going to college. Didn't apply to college. But by spring, realized I had called their bluff. But at that point, I hadn't applied to college. So I graduated having no clue what I was going to do. But due to a bizarre combination of things, there was an announcement on the local PA system about my congressman looking for someone to work in their office and, talk to the principal. So I talked to the principal. The principal said, I don't know, talk to the district office. So I talked to the district office and they say, well, we're really looking for pages who are going to be high school students next year, but you can give us a resume if you want. So I gave him a resume. And then one day I got a call at school. Now, my mom never called me at school. And she said, a congressman's office wants to see you right after school. And I lived out on a farm. And coincidentally, that was like one of 2 days the entire year I'd worn a dress to school. Went into the congressman's office, had this really bizarre interview with this woman who turns out to be the congressman's wife. And, questions, things like typing. And I said, I really don't type that well. And she said, well, you typed your resume, didn't you? It's kind of like, yeah. So
it took me 4 hours, but
Right, exactly. I did it. So the Monday after high school graduation, I get a call from the congressman's office saying, we're really looking for a page, so we can't hire you as a page since you're not going to be in high school, but we'll hire you as a staff assistant, which is really a more interesting job and pays better. So out of high school, I moved to Washington, D.C. and spent a year working for my congressman, who happened to be Majority Whip Tom Foley. Okay.
Do you have to do anything? You just kind of wait around for stuff to happen like that?
Yeah. But anyway, so I was working for Tom Foley. The person I was working for was a New Yorker. And it came out that I was good at math and science. So she said, you should apply to MIT. Do you know any philosophy on the concept of possible possibilities and impossible possibilities?
No, but I think you probably do as a philosophy major.
Yes. So it's just, it was not a possible possibility. Nobody from my hometown had ever gone to MIT, you know. So anyway, but then being in DC, working for a New Yorker who said, you should apply to MIT. And I'm like, okay, I'll apply to MIT. And I applied to MIT and I got in. And so it's kind of like when you get into MIT, you go.
Did you have a plan at that point, like what you wanted to study?
I actually thought I wanted to study ocean engineering because I love the ocean, you know, because I was so dissuaded from fashion, but I had continued sewing.
I find it interesting about you is that you're using both sides of your brain, which just seems
That's what I
atypical.
love.
I know, but you're creative, but you're also have the math and science. I mean, you don't, most people seem to be one or the other.
Exactly. And that's, we'll jump ahead to when I was working at Morgan Stanley and I went to a career counselor and said, I was thinking of becoming, so I was in information services at Morgan Stanley. And I told the career counselor, I was thinking of either becoming a lawyer or a fashion designer. And she told me that both of them were horrible choices for me because the lawyer was just so analytical and the fashion designer was so artistic.
But you found that there's math in fashion. I mean,
Oh
the,
yeah, I mean
the patents you
that's
have and the things you've invented, or
yeah. The work that, you know, I say my life's work is creating the new method of pattern drafting to work from body scans to have patterns that actually fit. I mean, it's my life's work because it's a way to bring together these two parts of my brain. And, you know, so much of my life I've been alternating. I went from DC, where I was, you know, working with words and stuff, to MIT studying engineering. And then I eventually said I wanted to major in political science. My parents said they want to pay tuition. So I was then in civil engineering. I just had enough of it. So I took a year off and worked in a fabric store, got promoted to design the display garments, and then went back and studied philosophy. And with the degree in philosophy, I then got hired by Morgan Stanley. Again, you were saying, do I just sit back and things happen in my life? MIT back then put together resume books that they sold. Companies would pay, I don't know, hundreds of dollars for these resume books of graduating MIT students. And the notice came out that they were putting out a resume book. And I was thinking, you know, nobody's hiring philosophy majors at MIT. But what the
nobody
hell?
knows there's philosophy majors at MIT.
Exactly. I mean, there are very few. It's more of a grad department. But I figured I would put in my resume just for, you know, shits and giggles. So I put my resume in. It was the only philosophy major, meaning I had a tab all to myself, you know. And Morgan Stanley pulled my resume, called me up, said, come in for an interview.
And that was the
So,
IT job.
yeah. At the time, Morgan Stanley had been having difficulty with their programmers not being able to communicate with their front office people. And they concluded that it was easier to teach someone with a technical aptitude how to program than to teach people with no people skills how to communicate. So I was hired as part of that program.
But then you
So
ended up going to get your law degree.
yeah, so I was at Morgan Stanley for 3.5 years. At some point, I felt like I was helping people lots of money make more money, and so I decided to go to law school for a couple of reasons. One, I intended to do legal philosophy because my unofficial undergraduate major was applied moral theory, and I went to law school thinking about that. And also, I really missed the environment at MIT. I was actually a little disappointed in law school that it just wasn't nearly the intellectual environment that MIT was. And also, I was really disappointed in that legal philosophers seem to define themselves by being incomprehensible. And if you try to explain how what they were saying made sense, they're like, no, 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 no. We don't want to make sense. We want to be, you know.
Do sewers or fabric professionals, I guess, have specialties? Is there
Oh
something that
yeah,
you are
absolutely.
really good at that people would say, oh, get Bonnie on the
Yeah,
horn. She'll take care of that.
I would say that my number one specialty is fitting. The issue of how to get clothes to fit a particular body, not just the stereotypical body, but the particular body, because bodies are different. And particularly as weight increases, body form variation increases. Because if you're dealing with a skeleton, there are differences to that skeleton, but there's a certain shape that skeleton's going to have. But as you increase adipose tissue, there are all different places that adipose tissue can be placed on that body. And to get that garment to fit properly, that's my pattern making work. I joke sometimes that I was born to do this work, because once I hit puberty, patterns didn't fit me anymore. And so I've been struggling with getting patterns to fit ever since I hit puberty. And one of the most valuable things I learned from my MIT education is if there's ever anything that I struggle with, chances are really good that other people are struggling with it too. So there's the question of, how do you figure out what size garment to put on a person? If you have a universe of clothes out there and you have a bunch of people, what garment is going to fit those people correctly? It's going to fit them best. Because since these aren't custom garments, they're not going to fit perfectly. They're not going to even fit great. But like, what is the best one to fit on them? There's something called wearing ease, which is ease is like the extra fabric in garment. So for example, if you made a garment that was absolutely skin tight and it didn't stretch, you couldn't take a breath. So you need wearing ease so that you can take a breath. In addition to that, there's design ease, which makes the garment look the way you want it to. And a simple example here is something called a dirndl skirt, which is a gathered skirt that's fitted at the waist and then is really big in the skirt. So if you have a figure, say, that is size 8 in the waist and size 12 in the hips, if you have a dirndl skirt, they can wear a size 8. It'll fit them at the waist, and there won't be quite as much extra fabric ease, design ease at the hips, but they'll look fine. In contrast, if you have a pencil skirt, a very straight skirt, you have to put them in the size 12, or else their size 12 hips won't fit in there, and it's going to be too big around the waist. I mean, that's the issue of, once the clothes are made and you have a bunch of people, what size should the people wear? And there are so many returns in mail order clothes because they order something and say, oh, that doesn't work. And so, I mean, issues also, if someone is dramatically different size from top to bottom, at what point do you have to bring, for a top, at what point do you have to bring the bottom size in? If it's a shirt sweater that just goes to the waist, you don't need to worry about the hip measurement at all. But the further it goes down, the more you need to bring in that hip measurement.
So this is much different for women than men. I mean, men's are like jeans and, suits, I mean, is about the only fitted thing, and most guys aren't.
A really important distinction is that in general, men's clothes are designed to hang off the shoulders and the waist and just camouflage their shape. Whereas women's clothing is designed to accentuate their shape. Add to this that women have not only more curves, but more distinct curves. And add further to this that men's clothes also are generally have room for alteration, like the split waistband in the back that's easier to adjust the waist, whereas women's clothing doesn't have that. So that's why it's such a problem to have fit women's clothing, and then why it's so important to find a new pattern making method. Because another problem is pattern making methods that exist make assumptions on what the body is shaped like. So different pattern making methods make different assumptions. But once you choose a method, it's assuming that your body is going to have a certain shape. So people who are working with body scanners are like, they call it measurement extraction. They're trying to recreate the experience of having that experience tailor take topical measurements on that body, and they're throwing away the three-dimensionality of the data. I mean, what the pattern making system that I'm coming up with is doing is it's embracing the three-dimensionality of the data, taking measurements that it's not practical to tape with a tape measure on a body. And by doing so, I'm able to capture the three-dimensionality of that body and not have to make assumptions on what that body looks like.
So this really goes to this concept that you'll order clothes online, something will scan you quickly,
right,
and you'll get clothes made just like they're made to fit you.
Right.
That's the sort of future vision of this.
Right.
Assuming, yeah.
Have you seen the movie Woody Allen movie Sleeper? It's a classic. So this is from, I think, 1978. So the premise is that he gets cryo preserved and gets woken up in the future. Okay. And he needs some clothes. So they take him into this shop where there's like an R2D2 going around with an Italian accent.
Yeah.
Okay. And has him step in a scanner and take his measurements. The garment gets produced, it spits it out, and it doesn't fit. And then it's like, oh, we can alter it. Okay, but the point is, this idea has been around for ages, but it's that black box of going from the body scan to the pattern that's been missing, and that's what I've been.
I mean, my daughter knows how to sew, but she
Yeah.
taught herself essentially. I mean, is this a skill that high school students should know? And
Absolutely, people should learn. I know when my boys were in Boy Scouts and they were asking for people to help with merit badges, I stepped right up and said, "Hey, I'll help with a sewing merit badge." And there isn't one. It seems like the very first merit badge should be how to sew and then sew on all your merit badges. I mean, there are so many people who don't know how to sew on a button. So I absolutely think people should learn to sew. And it's a problem because people aren't being taught. And to be able to sew on a button and hem a pair of pants, those are life skills. I mean, there's been a real renaissance of interest in sewing. And
why is that?
it's partly, I mean, of the Chloes of the world, of the Quins, they're not buying into this whole fast fashion, throw everything away. So I think that the youth who are interested in sustainability are more aware that this is much better for the planet. So I think that's part of what's getting people interested. I also know people who during COVID took up sewing because there was something to do at home and really fell in love with it.
What does a pattern maker do? I mean, so you're giving a design to someone who then has to convert it to a pattern that can be produced?
Yeah, so the way it works is someone comes up generally with a pretty picture. So like the fashion designer comes up with a pretty picture, and then they give it the pattern maker, and the pattern maker makes a pattern that then sews together to create the pretty picture.
Okay.
Makes sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a separate step, the production pattern maker modifies that pattern to make it so that you can sew it together in a factory and that you can cut it and make, 100 pieces of it and that it's going to work when you put it all together.
Right.
Because when you're doing custom work, you have a bunch of couture details and futsy little frou-frou things you add. In production, you can't have that. In production, you thoroughly think through every detail of how everything is going to work. And then once you cut 100 pieces, you don't want to have any screw ups. The whole issue of getting clothes to fit, like from body scans, one of the reasons I think it hasn't been solved yet is that people in the fashion industry generally don't have the technical and analytical skills to solve the problem. And people who have the technical and analytical skills don't understand the problem. They minimize the complexity of the fashion industry. Going back to when I was working at Easy Size, I was hired just again through the network. People heard about me, said, "Oh, come on by, help us out." And I went there and they said, "Oh, we really have it figured out already." And I said, "Okay, so how are you doing it?" And they said, "Well, we have the size chart." It turned out they had a German military World War II size chart. Okay. And I said, they had no understanding that different companies have used different size charts, number one. And number two, I said, what if someone is a size 8 in the waist and 12 in the hips? And they said, does that happen? These are people, a bunch of guys who had done some market research and said, what do people want? People want to know what size clothes they need to buy. Just completely not understanding. There are rules in how we fit our clothes. For example, we do not want our clothes to be anatomically correct. If we did, we would, prance around in lycra jumpsuits. We choose not to have them anatomically correct. And there are rules about how we do that. And again, there's art to it, but there's also understanding the science behind that art that, engineers generally don't appreciate.
Thank you for listening. to the Highlands Current podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, leave us a review on your listening app of choice, and consider becoming a member of the Current. The paper and website and this podcast are offered free to the community, paid for with support from our readers and listeners. To join for as little as $24 annually, visit highlandscurrent.org/join. That's highlandscurrent.org/join. Or catch up anytime on the latest news at highlandscurrent.org or pick up a copy of the print paper every Friday. Thanks again. I'm Chip Rowe, editor of The Current, and we'll see you next time.